Good evening, everyone. My name is Antonia Wunderlich, and on behalf of the British-German Association, I would like to welcome you to this online event. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, the British-German Association is a charity that promotes mutual understanding and good relations between the UK and Germany. This year is our 70th anniversary. Part of what we do is to provide a vibrant forum for debates, talks, discussions, and learning about Germany. So we regularly put on events such as this one, along with other initiatives such as our monthly newsletter. Tonight, we have the honour of welcoming His Excellency Andreas Michaelis, the German ambassador to the UK, for an interview ahead of next week's G7 summit. Interview will be conducted by BGA Chairman Peter Barnes. Before handing over to Peter, a quick note on the technology. There will be a Q&A session after the discussion. The Q&A will be conducted by the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screens. Please note, we will not be using the chat for this event, but the Q&A box. If you click on it, you can start typing up and sending in questions. You can also like someone else's question, and the more likes a question gets, the higher it goes on the list. On that note, over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Antonia. And Andreas, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. We are really very grateful to you for being a patron of the BGA and for all the support that we get from you and your colleagues at the embassy. And I'd also like to particularly compliment you this evening on your choice of neckwear. The BGA tie is very much appreciated that you're wearing. What I'd like to do is to start the interview by asking you a few questions about your career, which I think would be of particular interest to our members, and then come on to some topics which are current in the British-German dialogue at the moment. So I understand that you grew up in Hanover, the part of Germany with very strong British connections, and that you then decided to do a master's at Oxford. What was it that made you decide to come to Oxford to study a German philosopher, if I understand Immanuel Kant, and what were your impressions of Britain at the time?
Well, this was, Peter, let me say first, I'm very happy to be able to join you today. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. Your question, at the time we're looking at the mid-80s. That was the time when I had completed a master's degree in Germany. I had completed a degree in political science, English literature and philosophy, but I had decided for myself I wanted to become a professional academic. I want to become a philosopher. You get these ideas when you are young, and they were very strong with me, I would say. And I was very interested in a British philosopher, Sir Peter Strawson, at the time, who was, representing the most innovative Kant scholarship, a combination of a historical perspective, one of the greats of philosophy, but being very British, interested in an analytical approach, a modern approach. This didn't exist in Germany, and so I was looking for an opportunity to go to Oxford. I could win a scholarship, and with that scholarship of the university, I could spend 2 years in Oxford, which I enjoyed tremendously, I must say.
What was it that made you decide to switch from becoming a professional philosopher to becoming a diplomat? And did your philosophical studies in any way influence that decision?
Well, I think I can say it was an advert in Die Zeit, the weekly Die Zeit. I saw an advert actually crossing the channel at the time, at winter time. And, something that, really, really caught my eye was that it said something like, spend 2/3 of your work lifetime abroad and 1/3 of your work lifetime at home. The Foreign Service offers you a job. And I thought because I'd love to live abroad, but for family reasons, the idea of, setting a life up somewhere outside Germany was not too appealing for me. So I thought this is the best compromise. And I sent in my invitation and I went through the assessments and everything. And then quite surprisingly, they took me. And I stopped, pursuing a career as a professional philosopher after 2 years, and I had to give in. I couldn't complete my DPhil at the time. I suffered greatly. Today, I think I'm quite happy that I did other things at the time, because it was not a lost investment. I think it was more than worthwhile to pursue these studies.
Yeah. And I understand that even before you became a diplomat, while you were still studying, you became involved with the Green Party. What was it that attracted you to the Greens at the time?
Well, it's a bit, it wasn't really, the party was founded in 1980, and it was not really fully consolidated as a party. It worked as a party, it satisfied all the criteria. But it had developed out of a movement, and it was very much a green movement at the time. And so at the very beginning, I was not a member of the party. I just started, joining that movement on weekends for demonstrations against nuclear power plants, the kind of agenda that very much motivated us at the time. But it was also about the idea of a kind of more modern, different, less conservative Germany we had on our mind. And since then, that has been very much my political home.
As you know, in the British Civil Service and the British Foreign Office, it's unusual for political views of high-flying officials to be public. Can you explain a bit to a British audience what difference it makes to be publicly identified with the party, and in particular whether it's made a difference to your own career being seen as someone who is attracted to the Greens?
Well, when I was appointed to become ambassador to Israel, because that is a very sensitive and very important post in our service. You could read in Süddeutsche Zeitung, one of the important dailies in Germany, you could read a short piece with a title or with a headline, Foreign Minister Westerwelle appoints a Green to become ambassador to Israel. Okay. So that was very much a media perspective, because Westerwelle was not a member of the Green Party. On the contrary, he was the chairperson of the Liberal Party in Germany. So this already gives you probably a little bit the taste of, what it means and how we work with the idea of civil servants being members of parties. There is no contradiction in the Chancellor deciding to send somebody who is known to be a member of the Green Party as the German ambassador to Israel. And probably the most important, the key promotion in our service, which I always received from other parties. And that is very important. There is a constitutional guarantee for parties in Article 21 of the German Constitution. Basically, it describes how political parties contribute to the political life of the nation under the Constitution. So they receive, on the basis of this article, a very high dignity. And we see it as something positive in principle, that members who are members of parties contribute. And because parties are being seen as having a constitutional guarantee or operating on the basis of a constitutional guarantee, you cannot take away that basic right from civil servants. You could try, but the Constitutional Court would immediately hand it back to civil servants. So that's a bit the story, probably. But what is crucial in this is that within the constitutional framework, you are, of course, the loyal servant of the state. And as a loyal servant, you have to be neutral. I'm not executing party programs or manifestos as a civil servant, but I'm also a private individual. And as such, I can pursue, if I wanted to, a political guarantee. And maybe as a last remark, because I think that's also different in our system, once you have risen to a very senior rank in our service, you are officially considered a political civil servant, which means you can be fired without giving reasons from one day to another. You can be laid off easily, because the idea is that because if you work, for instance, as the permanent secretary of the ministry, your work is so political that if the government feels these people are not following, the right objectives which we have set ourselves, we better lay them off. And they can do so without expecting complicated legal procedures. But it's very straightforward. So there's also a risk in this for everybody who becomes a political servant at the top of our system.
That's very interesting. Thank you. You mentioned your time as ambassador in Israel, and you'd had, I think, 4 years in the outside exam before that, being involved with issues related to Israel. Can you say a little bit about, in view of Germany's history, what it means to be the German ambassador to Israel and what the challenges you faced in that role were?
Peter, thank you for asking the question, but I have to say, this is very, very fundamental, and it would really require to, explain a lot. It's very, very hard to be short on this. But I would say, as somebody who's very aware of the historical responsibility of Germany, given the failure and the crimes we are responsible for, it was one way of facing up to that history on a personal level. I think very, very important for me, the crucial posting of my career, because I wasn't there just once. I served twice in Israel. At the very start, my first posting abroad was in Israel as a very junior officer, and then again as ambassador, as you have said. So all in all, I've spent more than 7 years living and working in Israel. So it means a lot to me. What does it mean? It really means that you learn to be frank, open, transparent about the responsibility you recognize and acknowledge. But then it also requires that you find the right way how that translates into political practice and implementation, really. So what policy do you stand for? And that doesn't just apply to Middle East related policies. That applies to your human rights policy. That applies to the way you deal with refugees in your service and as a government. So many, many aspects are relevant in this regard, and it shapes probably your whole way of looking at things. And I need to add one very important aspect. Israel has helped me with two things. One, not to feel, embarrassed if emotion comes up, rises in your professional work. You learn, and you have to remain a private person while you act as your country's official, because if you were to make yourself artificially cold, you're not the person. You should be authentic and have to be authentic. Otherwise, Israelis, and I could probably say, Jewish people feel you are just selling them a cheap story. This is not about selling cheap stories. This is about how you honestly feel of what it means for you. And so from that point of view, it has helped me probably to set aside some of the concerns and insecurities which you feel once you start to appear on a public stage. And I'm very grateful for this. And the second is that Israelis have a wonderful, robust diplomacy. You learn about robust diplomacy, and I actually believe, if you're honest, if you are pursuing the right objectives, sometimes you got to be tough. Sometimes you got to be robust in the way you behave as a government or with some of your allies. And this is something which not all Germans understand can come together at the same time.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Between being ambassador to Israel and coming to London, you served as political director and then as Staatssekretär in the Auswärtiges Amt. You mentioned already one difference with the British system in that senior officials can be fired much more easily, but is there any other key differences you see it in the role of Staatssekretär and permanent secretary in the Foreign Office, or how would you characterize those differences?
I think there is, no, it's not about thinking, there is a fundamental difference in our system. And the difference is that the permanent secretaries I got to know and their work, you know, from a German point of view, seems less political. It's more technical, it's more administrative, it is resource oriented, you know, looking at the finances, looking at staff and personnel, human resources. In our case, we have two permanent secretaries in our ministry, and in most other ministries, it is the same story. One looks after the staff side and resources, and another one, the other one, is focusing on the delivery of the policy. So the job I did was, you know, I was in charge of European affairs, I was in charge of transatlantic affairs, East-West relations, Asia, Africa, Latin America. So the whole range geographically, but as part of a political job which I executed in very close collaboration with my director generals that were in charge of these various regions. So I think that's one important difference, and it goes fairly deep into the detail when it comes to you know, negotiations. We've just about to invite to another Libya conference, and I personally chaired the so-called Berlin conference that was held at the beginning of last year and opened a way towards moving out of the conflict in the civil war in Libya. So it's far more probably executive. It is far more operational than it usually is here. Another difference, I think, is that we usually serve a little longer. I'm a bit surprised, really, how short some of the terms of the permanent secretaries are in your system, and we don't have to go with political advisors at the same time. And last remark, in our system, when the minister is traveling or whatever, his deputy is the Staatssekretär. It's not another minister, junior minister in the ministry, but it is a senior civil servant in our system.
Yeah, very interesting. Your time as political director, which I think started in 2015, overlapped with the run-up to Brexit and then the negotiations that followed. To what extent were you in these roles involved in Germany's response to the threat of Brexit and its aftermath?
Yeah, very little, I must say, in that role, because the political director is, you know, I think you can say the chief negotiator for all diplomacy in which you are engaged at a bilateral level. And because the negotiations or the whole process was shaped by the European Union, e.g. by the Commission, that was something, you know, political directors were not doing. We were very busy negotiating at the beginning the implementation of the nuclear agreement with Iran, then with the Trump administration, possible survival of the agreement in which we unfortunately failed right now, the next generation of political directors sit together in Vienna, trying, with the Biden administration to make that agreement work again, and many other issues, like, for instance, the so-called Normandy format, which we had formed with France to cope with the Russian aggression vis-a-vis Eastern and Ukraine as such. So it was very East-West, Middle East, and Syria was part of it. Syria attempts to stop the civil war in Syria. So that was very much, I think, the portfolio that was relevant for me as political director, not so much the Brexit matter.
Yeah. Thank you. Following your time as Staatssekretär, you could, in practice, have asked to be posted anywhere in the world, and you were the top person in Das Wettergesamt. But from what I understand, you actually lobbied to be sent to London. What was it that particularly attracted you to coming to the court of St. James?
Well, I could give all kinds of professional justifications, but it also had a very important private dimension. I simply wanted to live in the country I'd learned to like so much or love while I was a student, and it had never really left me again after that. I constantly studied books dealing with the history of the British Empire, the history of the UK, various phases of the history of this country. I have a passion, a private passion, which is the history of the Royal Navy. So I came to visit places in the UK that are related to this. And I love literature, music. I have friends in this country. And so it was a temptation I couldn't resist when it was, because that's more the challenge really. It needs to be available. If there is somebody serving who just started this job a year ago, there is no chance, even if you can turn a few screws there. But in this case, it worked out, and I'm very happy to be here.
There's a famous British television advertisement which caricatures an ambassador as someone who dresses up in white tie and hands round silver trays of Ferrero Rocher chocolates. Can you help to contradict that caricature and say what you see the role of a modern ambassador as being?
Very important question, Peter, because I think we really need to focus on the role of not just ambassadors, I think, of diplomatic services. There is no one-size-fits-all answer to this, because you can be an ambassador who is, serving in a country in the middle of a conflict and has to do very dangerous and very relevant work there. You can get ambassadors who do very important multilateral work at NATO or at the United Nations. Now, London is a very traditional posting in terms of the long bilateral relationship we have had. And here I would say it is far more about communication than it involves you. For instance, I did not tweet or use Twitter until I came to London. I met all these clever people in our ministry who brief you before you go, and they said, you got to start using Twitter. It's about time you do. I have a very probably conservative understanding of what a Staatssekretär does. He's gray and invisible because it's about the minister. The minister should shine, and in the background you organize the work for him or her. But here it's a different story. You got to be out there. And this is why, admittedly, it's not that easy really to arrive at the time of the pandemic under lockdown conditions at the very start. We have, and many of your members will have seen it, known it, invited there. We have a very fine residence in London. But how many events could I organize there? Where could I connect Germany and the UK at the level of culture? Very, very difficult, I must say. If not disappointing. I felt a very strong, I felt very upbeat until 2 weeks ago. And like many of you, now I'm more, I have another question mark really about, are we facing the third wave? Yeah. If this starts again, if this, in a way continues, it will be very, very difficult.
Yeah, I understand that. In a strategy document that the British government published earlier this year, they said that the British and German foreign offices were working together on a joint declaration on foreign policy cooperation. Is there anything you can say today about what you expect that declaration to contain?
Well, first, I think I can confirm that, yes, we've been working on this, and we've been working on this not since yesterday, but for a very long time. And very long time means by now for years. We started work on this for serious in 2019, made a lot of progress, and we already agreed on a joint text at the beginning of 2020 last year. And Simon MacDonald, the permanent secretary, Sir Simon, of the FCDO, then FCO, and myself, we closed the text then and put it into the drawers again, because both sides felt it's not really yet the time to take it out and start life with a document like this. And so we put it back in because we had to complete the negotiations of the trade and cooperation agreement first. Withdrawal was already done. That was, withdrawal agreement, of course, already existed. And we had to revisit the text at the beginning of this year. And, if I'm not entirely mistaken, I think we've closed it again. You never know, you may want to open it again. In principle, it's ready for signature. So what are we looking at? We are looking at a foreign policy document. I think, that's my personal opinion. We will have to revisit the question of a broader and more fundamental document at some point in time. Fundamental, I mean, something that covers all areas of cooperation. But this document is on foreign policy cooperation only, and security cooperation, security policy cooperation. It has some mechanisms that it defines, how we, because before we met on a most regular basis in the context of the institutions of the European Union. So we have to set up mechanisms, how we work and where we meet. And then it has to define and identify areas in which we want to cooperate. And this ranges all the way from Russia to China. So it has a kind of geographical list. And of course, special substance areas. It also identifies the principles and values that drive us in this cooperation. So I think it would serve us well. It will serve us well once it's being signed by the two ministers, as a platform on which we can cooperate. And that enshrines, I think, on our side, that's important for the cooperation between Germany and the UK, a very pragmatic philosophy in our approach. Because what we could do post-Brexit is, what could have happened is that we lean back in our chairs and we say, well, let's wait, maybe one day the European Union and the UK, they will agree on some form of institutional cooperation in the area of foreign policy and security policy. But I think what we all see and what we feel is that's not going to happen too soon. You know, we can touch the question of Northern Ireland Protocol. Things are not as easy as we would wish they could be. But, you know, to lean back and say there's only one avenue, and that's the avenue of institutional cooperation between the European Union and the UK, that, you know, would basically make it impossible for the time being to put the glue between the UK and Germany that we need, that we stay together, that we stay connected. I think staying connected, that is the crucial concept. That's the crucial objective for the time being. If we can achieve this by bilateral cooperation between, on national level, between Germany and the UK, I think that's very important to stay as closely as possible. And the day will come at some point. You know, it's a free and sovereign decision of the UK and of the European Union and its member states that we enter into an institutional cooperation again. And we would, in terms of philosophy, by being pragmatic now, we would invest into, you know, the capital we would need to actually build this one day.
Excellent. This autumn in September, there are German federal elections, and then there is a COP26 meeting in November. And according to most of the recent opinion polls, it looks as if the Greens will form part of the next German government, either as the first or the second party. What difference do you see a Green coalition government making to German politics, and in particular to the question of Germany's approach to climate change?
Well, you know, I cannot give you the contour of a coalition agreement. I can't possibly. You can just look at the individual election manifestos. In the case of the Greens, that already exists. In the case of the CDU and CSU, it doesn't exist yet. But, you know, as you have said, climate policy will be a crucial element, you know, and quite independent of the question whether or not Green Party is part of such a coalition government. Because if you look at the parties that compete now in an election campaign, I think they've all realized that they have to advocate a very forward-leaning green policy. So from that point of view, I think the next German government, for a number of reasons, will be a very pro-green, climate-friendly, not just in terms of the targets that need to be reached, but also in terms of the policies that are required to achieve it in a systematic way, year after year, with sub-targets and the relevant policies and the relevant investment. I mean, look, because it's an interesting contribution to an election campaign that the co-chairperson of the Green Party, Annalena Baerbock, has just advocated an increase in the petrol price. Normally, that's not the kind of thing you would want to do in an election campaign. Take it, I think, as a reflection of the seriousness of the task that lies ahead of the next German government. And, you know, it will be far more concrete in terms of a medium and long-term approach in that field. But it will be, you know, far more comprehensive, I'm sure, in terms of actual policies. And the other field that is crucial is the field of how do you take the European Union forward? And this is not just something that is relevant for the Green Party. Look at the Chancellor candidate of the Conservatives in Germany, Armin Laschet. I think he is such an outspoken, he is such a convincing European. He will invest a lot of political capital into moving the European Union forward. That is what I expect. And that will be almost unavoidable, given the international competition, the challenges we need to face, and the difficulties the European Union as a project faces. Let's not belittle this. I believe that we should be aware of the French presidential elections also, so elections in Germany in September and then elections in April next year in France. If there is a Europe-friendly president in France, from a German point of view, say, hopefully, the two will push forward, I think, with a fresh reform agenda and a fresh program for the European Union. That's certainly the task that lies ahead of us.
Yeah. You mentioned when you were talking about the foreign policy cooperation agreement that China and Russia might be two of the elements that are contained in that. And for a long time, Germany's policy towards China has been characterized as Wandel durch Handel, the idea that you can change Chinese politics by doing more trade with it. And the trade part has clearly been hugely successful in terms of the growth of German exports to China. But some people argue that that has handicapped rather than helped Germany's leverage over China in terms of human rights, and that creates a kind of potential difference between the German position and the UK's position, given that the UK has this historical involvement with Hong Kong. Do you see there to be scope for a kind of sufficient alignment of views that the UK and Germany can work together on China?
I do, because I think, well, there are many relevant points here. First, I should say, don't forget the Cameron years of China policy. I think, the UK had a phase where China policy looked slightly different from what it looks today.
Great.
Then what I like about the whole, task of developing a joint approach as much as that is possible is that we say farewell to Trump's China approach, which was extremely binary. You could either turn right or turn left, and there were no shades of gray in the approach. I'm not saying that we should not be clear in our approach towards China. I think that's where self-critically I would say there is room for improvement on our side, because you say there has always been a strong trade focus. There is a strong trade focus. All our economic experts tell us that the reason why we are moving out of the COVID slump so quickly is because we tap Chinese growth at the same time. And that's due also, it's not just a trade thing, it's far more important that we have invested on a large scale in China. But, I think the situation should be marked by economic interaction with China and an approach that is defending the principles for which we stand at the same time. You cannot duck and cover. If it was ever possible, I think today it is not possible anymore. You have to support the principles for which our countries stand. And, I think that's where we have very much joint and common principles on which we can rely that need to be defended on the one hand, because what is also new in China policy is that China policy doesn't happen over there in China anymore. It happens here at home, in a very important way. It's about Chinese influence here. It is about the tech sphere of China that is being built, etc. And unsurprisingly, this is a very, very important task for us in the European Union, and by the same token, I think for us and the UK, to defend principles and to implement principles that allow for rule-governed behavior of China. And I think it's not impossible. It will take a lot of effort. It will require coalition. It will require clarity in approach. We will have to link up with the US in the same effort, but how do we link up? Is that the partnership that works well when it comes to China? And I can only say that the last 2 years in which I was Staatssekretär, we already changed so many aspects of our dealings with China that I'm quite confident, that we find a new, because that's what is required, and at the same time adequate approach of China policy. And Russia, I don't know if we have the time to touch it or should touch it, but that's a different fish to fry.
Quite. We're getting a lot of interesting questions coming in from the audience. So in a moment, I'll hand over to Antonio to moderate those. But perhaps I can just end with a question on Russia. Germany has always had a very different perspective on Russia, partly dictated by geography, because Russia is your immediate next door neighbour, whereas for the UK, it's a country somewhat further away. But there was an interesting criticism by Philip Stevens in the Financial Times last week, who is no natural sort of Eurosceptic, arguing that because Germany is now so dependent for energy on Russia, with Nord Stream 2 almost completed, that has handicapped Germany's ability to stand up for human rights in Russian-influenced territories like Belarus, and therefore the response to the hijacking has been less strong than it might be. So I just wanted to give you a chance to comment on that and to give a different view from Philip Stevens.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. First, because I'm involved in energy projects with the Russian Federation and with its predecessor, the Soviet Union, in an intense way, in an important way since the 1970s. And that has been, very relevant, especially when it comes to gas supplies from that entity. And it has never really, even during the Cold War, it hasn't never shaped policy, except in the sense that some form of connectedness existed between us and the Russians. Now, I'm the last who is naive about geostrategic implications of economic projects or geopolitical implications. They exist. And I think it was a mistake that the German government, my government, for a while at the beginning of the first criticism that came from Poland, that came from Ukraine about the Nord Stream 2 project, said, this is not about politics. This is just, an economic project. It was from the very beginning more than that. And I think we developed a sense of, especially also the Chancellor developed a sense of dealing with that dimension responsibly. And it would probably require a long time, to go into the details and also the technicalities to explain why that project, by definition, is, for instance, not a project pursued at the expense of Ukraine. Quite on the contrary, because I was involved in the negotiations here. Most of the gas supply, for instance, which today reaches Ukraine, although you would expect it must come from the east or from the north, really comes from the European Union. It's being organized on the basis of reverse flow. So we are talking about gas that ends up in a complex European gas distribution system and then feeds through reverse flow Ukraine again. There's also gas, which is transit gas that goes through Ukraine, and it is Ukraine that makes money on the transit fees. So that's a dimension. If you take away that gas, you take away the transit fees, you take away important portions of the Ukrainian budget. Normally, among states or between states, you would say, yeah, tough, things like this happen. In the case of Ukraine, being so exposed, I think is something we need to be taking seriously. That's why the European Union and Germany supported Ukraine in the negotiation of the gas price in terms of the gas it's still sourced from the Russian Federation. So I just want to give you, I can't do more, I want to give you part of the flavor of the complexity of that energy question. You know, it's not as easy as say you're building a pipeline in the Baltic, and because there's a pipeline and it is Russian gas that arrives in Europe, you're dependent on that gas, and others are out there to suffer. And of course, we all know, because the Trump administration has been very candid about this, very open and transparent, there is a fundamental US economic interest that counted. Yeah. At the end of the day, because you asked a question about the Green Party. The Green Party, for instance, is very clear in rejecting the Nord Stream 2 project. At least, you know, it's more difficult because there are legal implications or whatever. You know, this government, my government, is a government that says, like I've said, you know, it has implications. These can be addressed in a very responsible way. And, you know, let's wait. There are very important talks between us and the US that may produce, you know, a far more, you know, complex and complete way of looking at this project in the immediate future.
Yeah, super. Andreas, thank you very much. And let me know how David Wunderlich to moderate questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you. We've had many questions, and I hope to address as many as possible. The first question is from Chris Adams. Was going to Oxford a great culture shock? I was a neurosurgeon at Oxford, so just as well you did not fall off your bike.
Was it a culture shock? Yes, in a way it was. You know, it's. I will never forget. I ended up as middle common room president of Keble College, my college, and suddenly I had to, for the first time in my life, I had to behave in a kind of institutional British environment. And my understanding was German, very German. You know, you say there is a problem, and because there is a problem, it needs to be addressed. And you know, that's at least in the 80s. I don't know what it's like today. This was certainly a very unrefined, a very uncultured way from deep in the German forests to deal with issues like this, where you would probably say, you know, we could still improve on doing things here at the college if only we were considering moving into a new direction, etc. So it was a culture shock, I must admit. And I hope I learned fast enough, and I have not forgotten the lessons which I learned at that time.
Thank you. So the next question is from Anna Maria Greffen-Pilati. Your Excellency, given your in-depth experience of the Middle East and recent clashes in Jerusalem, what in your mind would be the best achievable compromise to ensure sustainable stability we could hope for?
Yes, if it was so easy that you could shoot from your hip, you know, with this one idea, how to address it and how to solve it, I'm sure, especially the US diplomacy would have entered the game again. You know, Tony Blinken was just in the region and has, you know, basically demonstrated US will to deal with these questions. I think for the time being, we would look more at a stabilization approach, stabilization in the sense that the situation, not only in the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank, has recently deteriorated economically, but also politically for a number of reasons. You know, legitimacy of the PA, of President Abbas has eroded recently. So before you can actually move forward, and we're in the process of the formation of a new Israeli government, we'll see, you know, how stable that will be, and what policy it will pursue. But before you can actually set up a framework for the discussion of the political future of those two entities, the PA in this situation and the State of Israel cooperating and living next to each other, I think you need to stabilize quite a lot on the Palestinian side for the time being. And then, you know, you can take it probably from there. I know this is not a very, you know, substantive answer to it, but it's the realism that is required. If you were to enter now, you know, with a big plan, like, you know, you entered 93 with Oslo, it would rather make things worse, I'm afraid, instead of, you know, stabilizing the situation economically, politically, and then see where we can take it from there.
The next question is from Anne Dighton. Since 1973, there has been an informal triangle of UK, France, West Germany, then Germany in the EC/EU. Today's security analyses focus increasingly on Germany's other strategic partners. How can Germany relations with the UK recover and then mature with the UK outside the EU and clearly less at the centre of European security policies in the EU and NATO? What matters? Individuals, transactional bargaining, business more than politics, intelligence cooperation, dialogue with Edinburgh/Belfast as well as London, etc.
Well, these are many questions. I think it's important that you know, we actually look at the needs in the area of security and defense, and there are various areas. Now, first, you know, we should look at our resources in this field, the field of defense in general. And we have for a very long time been partners in developing new technology in the defense field. That is something which we need to sort out how this is going to continue. Personally, you know, I believe we should be very, very open, given the high quality of UK capabilities in that area. Defense technology should be open for future cooperations. It should not be, you know, a kind of hard wall that you know, is built between the European Union and the UK here. We've just embarked on very important new projects with France and other partners in the European Union. But at the end of the day, if we look at European capabilities, I think we've all learned our lesson. You know, it's extremely expensive to develop new systems, and we should not waste our money. So the more we can pool our technologies and pool our resources, the better for all of us. And for this, we need to find the right way how we cooperate at this particular level with the UK, also when it comes to very innovative and very sensitive technologies. Then the second question, the question of, you know, where are we a security provider in our neighborhood, and, you know, also in a more global perspective. I think we just need to discuss, you know, I give you one example, you know, German contingents have not been too present in Africa in the past. We probably felt we are not too experienced when it comes to peacekeeping in Africa or in stabilization activities, security stabilization. Our French colleagues, I think they had a very good argument that we become more active in the Sahel region, a francophone region, you know, where you also, in terms of your deployment, need to be able to speak the French language. And how many, you know, when you look at police and army, so how many people do you have who are, you know, language-wise qualified to act in this environment? We took it very seriously. We started with qualification activities, etc. Now the UK is also present with a contingent in Mali. I think this is an area which in terms of, emanating threats from IS, in terms of the sheer stability of these governments or the danger of them collapsing completely, we need to invest. And this investment cannot just be done with the tools of development assistance. I think it's crucial that it also has a security component. And if you look, for instance, at how the Russian Federation becomes more and more active player in Africa, how China becomes a more and more active player in Africa, I think Africa is an area where security cooperation between the UK and Germany and France and other partners in the European Union is very, very important. I could give other examples, but we can only do this if we develop, a joint political vision of what we want to achieve in these areas. You can't just go there and deploy your forces.
The next question is from Philip Nelson. As a philosopher and a political civil servant, what are your views about the responsibility of subsequent generations for the deeds of their country and history? I'm thinking of the Nazis' time, of course, but also of colonial events in Namibia, the Tulsa Massacre in the USA, and the 1999 Amritsar Massacre in British India. When are reparations appropriate?
Okay, I think it's very important, we have a full book of German crimes in the past to deal with. So I'm quite open when it comes to the point that I'm not doing the job of others. Each and every nation has to look at its own responsibility. And, my focus is on German responsibilities here. And there is one very, very important aspect, which I think we have discussed at length between the generations in Germany. And that is the question, is my generation born in 59, post-war, is this generation responsible for, the horrible crime of the Shoah and the attempt to kill European Jewry? And my answer to this is very clearly, yes, because we are not just individuals. We are part of our nations, the nation we were born into, in which we were raised, the environment, the political responsibility that counts. So you can't abandon this simply by pointing to your age or to your generation. And in our case, it's very important because we become more and more diverse also. And there is the question being asked whether, let's say a German of Turkish origin, whether he or she should feel responsible for crimes which maybe the generation, or not maybe, but the generation of my parents and grandparents has committed, who were very much, a German generation. And there again, I think the answer needs to be, because we are not, it doesn't exist. We are, and that's almost a Hegelian way of looking at things, or a Greek way of looking at things, that you are not an isolated atomic individual. You are always both at the same time, an individual and a member of the group in which you belong and in which you live. And for that very reason, you cannot say farewell to that responsibility, which is a responsibility of your nation. And we've just completed negotiations, very, very difficult, already in terms of finding the right counterpart for it with Namibia on the German, as we now also address it, the German genocide in 1904, the killing of the Herero tribe and the Nama tribe in Namibia. So we are now, and it took a while, I think, for us as Germans to reach the point where we can face up to other crimes in our history, pre-Second World War, pre-Nazi crimes, even pre-First World War crimes. I think because there was such an enormous mountain you already had to climb. it was a matter of time, but now that also happens. And I think taking everything together, that's a positive development.
We have time for one more question. And this is the one from Malcolm Scott. Your Excellency, thank you for the talk today. What are your main ambitions for the UK-Germany relationship during your time here?
I would like to overcome fully the tension which is produced by the implementation of the withdrawal agreement at the moment. Now, that sounds very, very technical, but it is an important point. You know, we've basically agreed on international treaties that govern and regulate the divorce between the UK and the European Union. But in the case of Northern Ireland, that's a difficult issue. And what I don't want a development in which all the enormous potential and the tradition at the same time, that great tradition of working together, of living together with people in the UK and cooperating with this country, is being affected in a negative way by elements of a divorce which has happened not only a while ago, but at some point in time, a long time ago. So we should be able to look forward. We stand on a new platform. I'm interested in developing the potential of the relationship on the basis of a post-Brexit definition, okay? My platform should not be one where, you know, you still wipe your eyes and, you know, you have tears in your eyes because divorce happened. No, that's a closed chapter. And now it's about finding the right needs to go. I think that's very important. Also on the UK side, when you say, you know, what are we interested in? I think, you know, we want to reach out with our hand and offer to the UK a package, a substance of cooperation in research, for instance. Look at the number of companies, German companies, that have created jobs in this country, in the UK. It's more than 500,000 jobs that depend on German companies. There are so many ways in which we are connected. So at the moment, I'm just happy if our focus is again on the question, first on the high quality, the high potential, and how we take it with new projects into the future. And one area that is particularly relevant, like I've said at the beginning, are green technologies, innovative technologies, and our fields of research in various areas, because the UK is the second most important country in terms of research cooperation for Germany. So you don't really have to ask questions. You find all the answers simply by opening the book.
I think that's a very good place to end. Andreas, thank you very much indeed for a fantastically thoughtful and wide-ranging discussion. We seem to have covered everything from Hegel to China to the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. What you're saying about trying to move the British-German relationship forward very much chimes with what the British-German Association is trying to do from a civil society perspective. And we look forward to continuing to work closely with you and your colleagues in the years ahead to try and achieve some of those objectives. So on behalf of the British-German Association, thank you again very much indeed for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Peter. And let me say thank you very much for the work you do personally and your members do, because that's, I think, on our side, also a very clear conviction. This won't be just a technical job. We need civil society. That is the fuel on which the whole operation runs. And that's why your contribution is absolutely key in this.
Great. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.